Hello again, everybody. So, those of you that have come over to sort of see this database chat, I figured that it'd be easier to put this kind of stuff in a separate video because I realised that it's probably a pretty small fraction of the viewers that are actually interested in this kind of stuff. But I'm sure a lot of you might be interested in how we actually managed to make the database the way that we did. Because it's not just a case of put two teams in lower league, profit. Believe me, I have put too many hours probably into sorting this database out, and I really do thank all the people that have helped me test it. We've come a long way from where we were, is all I can really say about that. Now, most of the database testing has not really been to do with Whitport Athletic. They are basically, there's not been a lot to really do there. As long as the club is like solvent and stable at the start and has the facilities that I want, i.e. below average for the league, generally speaking, there's not really much more you can do because it's down to the player, really. The issues really come from Blackhaven United, to be honest. So this is they. How do you get a team from the 8th tier to the Premier League without touching them and having an AI manager in charge? As you can see, it's Thomas Stepanek there. We've also got other players from former saves at the club as well. Because I'm sure there's, as you would have seen throughout the years, plenty of FM experiment videos, all over YouTube, in fact, about what happens when you give a club in, well, usually the 6th tier, in fact, generally speaking, like £1 billion, for example, to see what they do. And generally speaking, they will sign outrageous players, by outrageous I don't mean good, on huge money in lower divisions, and it really just shifts the balance all over the shop, and they basically don't get that far. A lot of the time they seem to get to the championship and then kind of stall out, which is not what you want, although that does seem to be the case through FM for virtually any team that isn't one of the traditional big six in the Premier League. Hopefully there are ways to break their hegemony though, and the way that we've intended to do that is, firstly, obviously, they've got a manager in Thomas Stepanek from a former save, who, as you can see, is outrageously good. We're trying to give them every possible advantage they can. Now, you can see, again, his contract is ridiculous. This is sort of behind the hood sort of stuff that's sort of to keep things going in the background, essentially. So you can see he has a preference to be there. He wants to be there. He probably will not leave of his own volition, essentially. So if a big club comes in, it's very unlikely that he's going to leave the club, which is exactly what you want, because you don't want him to then leave and then, yeah. Now, there's obviously the chance that he could get sacked. That is a thing that has happened in plenty of simulations. Though in the last few that I've done, he has persisted with the club for at least 15 years, or to the point where I've had to start a new database, which is good. And the same kind of applies to the other members of the staff that they've got at the club. They're all excellent. Now, obviously, the space is for the club to sign more people, but I've put people in places that have got ridiculously good attributes to try and help the club in any way I can. So, good physio, they've got a good head scout, good director of football, they've got the right tendencies, the right personalities to hopefully keep them there long term, which should at least give the club a little boost, I hope. I really don't know how that game actually handles that sort of stuff for AI clubs. But the main thing was, how do we get them to do what we need them to do without just giving them £1 billion at the start? Because that will then distort the wages horrendously. Because as you would have seen from the club, their finances are okay. They're not rich by any stretch. It says estimated value of 0 for some reason. I don't really know why that is, but that will change pretty soon. So the way we've done it is with sponsorship income, essentially. Now, this allows us to drip feed them money throughout the save. Or certainly at least for the first 30 years of the save. That's how long we've actually scheduled it for. But you might be thinking, once again, how does that actually stop them from overspending? So, the way it works is, as you can see, their sponsorship income currently for the first season is £115,000. You can notice ours is, where is ours? Oh, it's actually 10k. That's not too bad, actually. That was just generated by the game. I'll take that. I think I originally gave them 5, so we must have found another sponsor. So in their first season, they obviously start with a bank balance that's slightly higher, but their bank balance is not high. It's like 200 grand in the bank, which is, again, not huge money really, but it's good enough. And of course, because they've got reasonably good facilities, in fact, you can see here that they've got like average training and youth, which is, believe me, a lot better than it should be at this level, and also really good youth recruitment and junior coaching, which is important for bringing through young players, which means that the club themselves are going to spawn with much better players than we do at this level. So that should at least help them out for the first few divisions, as you'd already know. In the meantime, they will of course be getting more sponsorship income too, which will allow them to sign better players than perhaps the other clubs in this division, and allow them to push up through the first couple of divisions relatively easily. That's not usually where the problems lie. The problems then lie once they get towards the Football League. So the way I've structured this is, you can actually future date sponsorship income on the pre-game editor, which is exactly what we've done here. So what essentially happens is, their money that they get from sponsorship income each year will increase year upon year as we move through this save, to the point where, like 30 years from now, they'll be getting hundreds of millions, basically, because that's the only way to balance things out, because they refuse to spend money. You can give them a sugar daddy, but that doesn't actually seem to help them. It makes them spend badly rather than in any kind of like frugal way. They just buy crap for really big money and end up getting into huge issues where their wage budget has to constantly be reduced if they don't actually succeed at their target for that year. It also makes the manager more likely to get sacked because it increases the expectations on the manager. So the club is now technically fan-owned, which should prevent any massive takeovers, which is another problem that seemed to be pervasive in the early versions of the database. But year upon year, the sponsorship income here will increase. Now, obviously, again, this is behind the hood sort of stuff, not sort of stuff we're actually going to be looking at, but it's just enough to keep them ticking over. And it will allow them to spend more than the other clubs at their division by quite some amount, but not spend ludicrous amounts, basically. It's how you keep things sort of within a reasonable realm of realism, essentially. So they will continually up their wage spending each year, but they won't go from £0 to £1 million a week in the first season. The chances are they'll probably be spending twice as much as the other clubs at this level, which is, again, reasonable for a club that have got massive money, but it would be ridiculous if they came in and again were spending like £1 million a week. We've also had to structure things at the club in terms of the board and the expectations of the fans in a way to prevent Stepanek from being sacked. It could still happen, but it's less likely, essentially. And to give him good sort of tendencies that will hopefully help him sign good players. But that's the theory. And also a good director of football, which should hopefully help with that as well. But that remains to be seen. Now, there are, as always, probably going to be some problems we run into, but we've done so much testing that if a problem does come up, it's one of those things that's just like, there's nothing you can really do about it. Now, there's one thing I am aware of, and that is the fact that League One will forever have 23 teams in this version of the database, because it's hard-coded into the game in the default database somehow to go back to 4 teams, basically, to go back to 24 teams. However, it seems that when you add lower leagues, as these databases do, in order to make that work, you have to set League 2, or League 1 rather, to have 23 teams, and it won't let you adjust the amount of relegation dynamically like that. So unfortunately, that's just something we're going to have to deal with. We'll roleplay it. It's not really a huge deal anyway. And that's the only real issue that I actually know of as far as the database itself, which is good, really. There are also a few other fail-safes I put in place. For example, unfortunately, if Thomas Stepanek is sacked by Blackhaven, Tony Harris, his assistant, will go with him. That seems to be an inevitable problem, which is annoying because it makes them worse. It also tends to bring the head of youth development with them as well, who is another player, a person I've put there specifically to give them good attributes and help them out. So hopefully they don't sack Thomas Stepanek, but if they do, I do have a slight placeholder that I can put in place. Well, not even put in place, but something that will hopefully happen, and I've not tested this, so we really don't know, that might make the save a little bit more fun. Now, again, if you don't want a spoiler about a little Easter egg I've hidden, now will be the time to turn off. But essentially, I've put some other players from former saves, like I mentioned, into the database as unemployed. Well, they were supposed to be in there as unemployed managers. The problem is, for some reason, I'm sure there is a way around this, I just wasn't able to figure it out on short notice, as this was something that I only realised was going to be a problem this morning. And that is that when you put managers into the game unemployed, they don't seem to appear in the database for some reason. Again, I don't know how to fix that. I'm sure there is a way to make that happen without a problem, but I didn't know it at the time, so we've moved on with that. So the only way I could get these 3 people, and there are 3 of them, into the game as managers was to make them manage lower league clubs, i.e. clubs that are in a division below us, which is not turned on. So in theory, it shouldn't cause any problems with the fact that yeah, they've got good attributes, and they'll probably get poached by bigger clubs anyway, which is kind of what I wanted. But having them actually manage a side allows me to bring them into the database. Now, 2 of those guys have a preference for managing Blackhaven United because they are fans of the club, and that's their long-term plan, which means, hopefully, if Thomas Stepanek was to get sacked by Blackhaven United, there is a very good chance that the club would actually appoint one of those 2 guys. Now, again, I'm not going to tell you who they are, but that is the plan if that was to happen. Now, again, I don't know if this works or not, but it would be cool if it did, and I think it'd be quite a fun surprise for a lot of people watching the main series, essentially. Again, not going to say who they are, but they're at lower league sides. Now, I'm hoping that they will leave those lower league sides anyway because their manager stats are, of course, ridiculous. So the plan was to have them into the game as other managers that we could potentially come up against later in the save, and hopefully that will happen anyway because they have no allegiances to these sides, and stands to reason they will probably get poached by much better teams anyway. So the hope would be later, if Stepanek did leave, then they would come in and rescue the ship. So that would be kind of fun as well. Now, obviously, a lot of this save success relies on the success of the team we're not managing, which is a lot of a risk to put, but the last few versions of the database I've done have been much more successful. I don't even know why, and it might just be pure luck, to be honest, so hopefully we get a bit of good luck ourselves. But for the most part, they've generally speaking been able to walk their way, not like over the top, so they haven't won every game, they haven't like gone unbeaten seasons or anything like that, because that would be a bit silly, although technically within the realms of possibility given their additional quality and wage structure. But they generally speaking are able to get a couple of promotions on the bounce. Sometimes they stall out for a season in the National League, but then another set of sponsorship income comes in and it boosts them even further, and therefore they're able to get slightly better players and go up the next year. And that's the benefit of giving them the staggered sponsorship income. And then generally speaking, they do a couple of seasons in League 2, sometimes 3, and then they'll win it the 3rd season if they don't go up the 2nd season through the playoffs. That generally seems to be how it works. In League One, it's a similar story. Championship's a little bit tougher. I've seen them get stuck for 4 years there, or only go for as little as 2 years. And then they have got to the Premier League. And that is the thing that was key for me, was making sure that they were able to get to the Premier League, because that seems to be the stalling out point. And a lot of the tests we did early on was that they were sometimes able to get there for 1 season, but then were immediately relegated with like 7 points. But on my latest few versions of the database, they have got up. One time they did go down, but for the most part, they've been able to stay up 1st season, which is super important, because it seems that if they're able to do that, they're then able to consolidate themselves. I haven't gone far enough into the future to see whether they can win it yet. But I think in one of my, they came as high as 6th, and not that far into the database either. Obviously far enough to give them a reasonable chance of getting up through the 7 promotions they're going to need. But I'm talking within like 13 seasons, they were up there challenging for Europe in the Premier League. And that is exactly what I want. So it can be done, is all I'm saying. So if you ever wondered how you could maybe achieve something like that with an AI club, I don't know why you'd want to potentially, but if you wanted to do something like this or had something else in mind, then sponsorship income, staggering the sponsorship income seems to be the absolute like zenith of the way to do that. Unless there's a better way, I don't really know about it. But it does seem that the sponsorship income is the key. Sugar Daddy seems to make no difference whatsoever. It all seems to be about the club having the money and then staying solvent and then able to spend the money as and when they want, basically. They don't spend outlandish numbers on wage budget. When they got to the Premier League, they were still the lowest wage budget in the league. So that should give you some idea of the way that it's structured. Like 30 years from now, their sponsorship income will be up in the hundreds of millions. And I'm talking like 700 million, which might seem like a lot of money, and it absolutely is. But you'd be surprised how little of that they actually spend on players and wage structure. I really don't know where it's going. I think they might just be money laundering it, which wouldn't be surprising because it's Blackhaven United and they suck. Now, of course, my character in the actual series is going to be hating Blackhaven and everything they do, but you've got to understand, in the background, I'm secretly rooting for their success because it's important. But obviously, we will not be doing that in the actual series. But just between you and me, that's essentially what we're hoping for. They need to do well so that everything else can do well. And so we can all have a bloody good time and have a wonderful fight with Blackhaven United as we go up the leagues and form probably the greatest rivalry in world football. So there we go. That's a little bit more information about the database. I hope this answered some questions you might have. And obviously, if you do have a question about the database, do leave it in the comments. I'll try my best to answer it. I'm not particularly good with databases, as I'm sure you could probably tell. But I'm doing my best, and I did want to make sure that I did this myself because I feel like there's always an opportunity to learn these things. And I think it's important to grab those chances when you can. And to take risks like this and do these kind of saves, I think, again, is important because, you know, comfort zones are boring. Let's try and do something ridiculous. So yeah, thank you for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Hold your gun, capybara. Bye-bye.